Before we get into it, I got this bike from the Ride Hub here in Squamish, and it performs super well, so I definitely recommend those guys. Also, if you like and subscribe, that helps. Using any of the links in my description helps also. So let's get into it. All right, so I am out here today in beautiful Squamish, British Columbia, aboard the all-new Generation 6 trekslash. I am really excited to give this bike a full review because it really interests me. The high pivot, the mullet, the fully new geometry, and yeah, figure I shouldn't skip this as it gives me a little bit better idea of wheelbase. Okay, not bad. So, like I was saying, this guy ticks a lot of the boxes I had been looking for before I bought my new Santa Cruz Nomad. And I just wanted to see if I made a mistake. And being able to ride this thing up in Squamish is a great area. You know, it's not my usual test tracks, but I ride up here a lot. And there's so many cool features and fun things to ride that should give it a good test. This bike had a lot of initial review issues with the chain dropping, but that is supposedly fixed. So I'm interested in that, and there is some chunkiness to be had, so we can check that out. Also, I am riding a size large. I do usually ride treks in a medium large, but the last few treks I reviewed were my personal bikes. So it was easy to swap the dropper to a longer spec, and for this one, I was surprised how much room I had on the large. So I'm on the large. It doesn't feel too long, even though the numbers say different, but I'm 5'11", 170 pounds, or 180 centimeters for some of you guys, and wanted to give it a go. We're on the climb. It's a bit sloppier than I thought, so should be a good day for testing that traction. It is on the stock Bontraire tires, so they're fine, but it's not the usual tires but it's not the tires I'm used to riding, so I don't know. Other than that, this is like what I would have previously always called the go-to build in that 9.8. It's a bit more expensive than it used to be, mainly because it's got that GX axis. But yeah, it shifts well right now, and it's not too loud. Whew, steep and loose. A lot of people I've talked to have been worried about this bike because of the high pivot and the chain drop issues. But honestly, I haven't had a single issue with the chain. I've had really good luck with all the high pivots I've tried. And this one climbs better than the last gen slash by a significant margin. That other bike, was a great climber for its time, but its time had come and gone. And this thing climbs just as well. Well, maybe not just as well as the new EX, but pretty close. So after a good bit of climbing and some real techie climbing, how's this thing do? Well, it did well, especially for what seems like a huge bike on the switchbacks. I didn't have any trouble. It wasn't my usual switchback, but definitely would give this thing an A there. Traction is all over the place. Like, it's just clawing at everything, as you can see, as I made it up over these roots. But man, traction is definitely an A+, which is definitely a little bit more expected in these enduro bikes, but not always. So last, for efficiency, everyone was claiming this bike climbed exceptionally well. And my expectations were pretty high because of that. But I gotta say, it lived up to them. you don't feel these idler pulleys. If someone was like, oh, I feel that that bike's too much for what I like to do, I'd say, no, you're good. There's no problem. It will pedal up everything. The one thing that's not as great is the idler pulleys are a little loud, but not the worst thing. I've had way worse creaking bikes, so, you know, that's fine. But yeah, as far as efficiency goes, the body position also adds to that. And for the size large with this big reach, I thought it would feel either a little stretched or that more upright bear on a bicycle look, but it's got a decent body position for climbing, so it really just adds up to a super efficient bike. I'd probably give it an A+, maybe just an A, but for enduro bikes, definitely an A+. So let's compare it directly to the altitude and chainsaw that I've been riding recently. It's definitely more efficient than the altitude. The climbing position is very similar and very nice. Compared to the Da Vinci, again, well, compared to the Da Vinci, I wouldn't say it's more efficient, but it feels like less weight. So it feels easier. And definitely the body position is, I think, better. That Da Vinci is kind of the token bear on a tricycle bike. Not that that's the worst thing ever, it's very comfy, but if you're doing long climbs and want to stretch out and breathe, that's not as ideal. So yeah, that's climbing. And you can't go to Squamish, or you can, but it's hard without riding in and out, especially when you don't ride here a lot. It's super great for feeling out the rocks. And the fun stuff. How's this guy descend? Well, like a lot of good enduro bikes these days, this descends like it's ready to catch you on most things. It doesn't feel nearly as long as the reach number would suggest, and it's much more maneuverable than I thought it was going to be. So for the first chunky bit, that was great. A lot of fun. Body position on this bike is good. Maybe slightly high as far as the bottom ride goes, but I'll have to take a look at the chart. Oh, and this move is relatively hard in the dry. So maybe I'll just go this way. Through the rough, that high pivot does what high pivots do, and it just eats up the chunk. Traction is great. As you get going faster and deeper into that suspension, you really feel the bike get more stable. I didn't get to hit it many jumps, so I can't say a ton to that, but just popping off features here and there into the in and out slab, it feels great. So you got traction, you got high speed rock smashing, And it seems like it jumps well, so I don't know what else you could ask for. So who's this bike for? Well, if you like the old Slash, but were afraid this one lost too much playfulness, then this bike's for you because it did not. If you want to check out a high pivot bike and are nervous that the high pivot's just going to be too much, again, it's not. And if you want a race bike that likes to free ride, or definitely is a bit more angled towards steep and techie terrain, again, this is a great bike. So I've already talked about how this bike is pretty great. And as far as the bike itself, I don't think I can come up with anything I really don't like. Maybe the noise, but the issue I see, at least from my end, is the build. This bike's expensive and it's gone up in price significantly from the last gen. And then you add on the axis, and this bike is no joke. And when you're spending no joke money, these tires, well, I don't want to call them a joke, but these tires. Also, these grips, really uncomfortable. And my bottle has been ejected a couple times, which also isn't great. I would rather have this with some XT, and then I'd have the money to put on the better tires and grips. I know those are preference things, but I don't see many people loving these grips. Final thoughts. Trek is kind of blowing it by not getting this bike into more people's hands. This bike is really as good as a lot of those reviews have said. And the fact that I haven't seen it at a demo event or in any of the shops around the Pacific Northwest, except for this one in Squamish, it's kind of a letdown, because when you have a product this good, you really should get it into the hands of everyone. And especially if they're gonna try to sell it for that price. Man, gotta get people on this bike first, because I get it. Like, you look at it, it looks like so much bike. There's so much going on. But when you're pedaling uphill, it doesn't feel like that. And when you go downhill, you feel the magic underneath you, and it's pretty great. It's definitely more of a climber than my chainsaw. That said, it's probably more of a direct competitor with the Spartan. And except for the noise, everything else is pretty comparable. If you're looking to pick one of these up, using that link in my description and on my channel does a ton for me and helps keeping these demos going. This was an expensive demo, and it's going to be a lot of views to pay for it, so I don't know. But if you hit that like or subscribe button, that helps, as well as using any of those links for Jensen USA, Trek, Rourke Apparel. It's all super helpful. We'll see you next week. Whew. Not bad. This bike really doesn't feel as big as the reach number would suggest. So, really like that. Glad I could keep it contained on a pretty rough section of trail. Whew.